Hi, everybody. It's Becky with New Hampshire Audubon. Hi, thanks for joining me. Welcome to our Thursday Facebook Q&A. It's Becky with New Hampshire Audubon, and I'm here to share some interesting nature information and also to answer any questions that you might have. So as always, welcome. And if anybody can see or hear me, please post a comment so I know everything's working all right. I think we've got the system down, but it's always nice to have that reassurance. So thanks. Glad you could be here. And we've got some interesting things that I want to share. Um, and I'm hoping that people will be able to see and hear what I'm going to show. We'll try it. Got an experiment to try. We'll see how it goes. But the first thing that I wanted to talk about was to get back to something that I had talked about last week that I was going to research, and that's Carolina wrens in New Hampshire. I needed to do a little bit of research because they are recent arrivals to the state. They're a more southerly bird that never used to be in New Hampshire. And so I did a little bit of checking on our backyard winter bird survey of when we first started to see Carolina wrens more regularly. When we first expanded the survey in 1987 to include all birds, there were two Carolina wrens. Prior to 1987, we were just looking at cardinals and titmice, northern mockingbirds, and mourning doves. So just those four species. And then we expanded it to all birds in 1987, and there were a grand total of two. And then in the 90s, it wasn't until 93 that we went over 20 birds on the survey. But then they dropped back to three in 1996. And that's one of the things that can happen when we get a severe winter. The, uh, the birds, we're sort of at the edge of their northern range. So if we get a cold winter, they tend to have some mortality, and the Carolina wren population goes down again. And then when we have a more mild winter, they survive and their population builds up because they are not migratory birds. So the Carolina wrens are here year round and they're on territory year round. So back to three of them in 96, but we had 50, over 50 in 2003. So 4 years and the population had not only rebounded but increased. And then in 2011, we finally went over 100. Now, the peak number that we've ever had on the Backyard Winter Bird Survey in New Hampshire is 262. So that survey takes place the second weekend in February, so it's a good measure of our year-round resident birds. After 2014, when we had the 262, the population went down again, 133 in 2016. And again, we had a severe winter in between there, so the population dropped, went up again a little, then back down a little in 2019, and then back up again in 2020. So those ups and downs and a gradual increase in Carolina wrens is pretty typical of a species that is extending its range northward. And now they're common south of the White Mountains, uh, but not north of the White Mountains. They're still quite rare there. And I had mentioned that I found one on the Nashua Hollis Christmas bird count back at a time when it was quite rare. And I think it was the first one that the count had ever had in 1992. Um, so that was an exciting happening for us. I'm going to take a moment, see if I'm coming up on my phone here. Let's see if I can find me. I want to make sure everything seems to be working, and I can't find me yet. So let's try something here. Hold on for a moment, everybody. Again, if you can see or hear me, please let me know. That would be great. Thanks. Okay. Oh, there we go. All right. Think I've got you. So again, Becky with New Hampshire Audubon, welcome. Please, if you have any questions, send a comment. Let me know if you've seen anything interesting or have questions about what's been happening or something that you've seen in your yard or neighborhood. Thanks for joining me. I was just talking about Carolina wrens and how they have increased in the state. And I've got a couple in my yard that sing back and forth, but again, they're still rare north of the White Mountains. And we didn't see them in big numbers until really into the 2000s. And we've now got them breeding in the state. Obviously not at this time of year, but we do have them nesting. So that's a new species, well, relatively new in the last 40 years or so, 30 years. 30 years, can it really be that long? Wow, I guess it is. 1990s was when we had our first nesting record. So, nice species to have. And you may see them, they like to come to suet. They'll also come to sunflower hearts. And some of you have reported them nesting in, say, your garage or an old window box. Um, so sometimes they're nesting right around human structures, and keep your eye out for them. I hope you've all had a chance to see on Facebook the mountain ash photos. That's a native species. There's native mountain ash. There's also European mountain ash that people plant. But those mountain ash berries are eaten by our frugivores. Now, frugivores are the birds that eat fruit. And the most common ones that eat a lot of fruit are waxwings. We have both cedar waxwings, and then sometimes we get Bohemian waxwings. They're the northern version of the cedar waxwings. And in some years they come south. And then pine grosbeaks also eat fruit. And in fact, I've seen pine grosbeaks at a couple of trees, just single ones recently, right in my neighborhood in Concord. So I wanted to try and show you a picture. Oh boy, what did I do with my camera? So pine grosbeaks, when they're farther north, they may be feeding on the native mountain ash. That native mountain ash you can find in the White Mountains, you can find farther north, you can find up into Canada. So it can be a great food source, but it's not consistent every year. So when we have poor years of fruit supplies up north, those northern frugivores, pine grosbeaks, and sometimes Bohemian waxwings will come south. And all right, let's see if I can get this so you can see it. Oh, it's a little washed out, isn't it? Oh, that's not too bad. There we go. So that's a pine grosbeak. It's feeding on a crabapple tree. You can see it's got some of the stuff from the berries in its bill, but it does have a large bill. This one is an immature, and it it has a gray, and you saw the rusty colored plumage on it. Sometimes they can be greenish, and then the adult males are a bright pink color on their breast. So watch for them. Oftentimes they're in small flocks of 6 to 10 birds, but again, I mentioned I've seen just single birds around in individual fruit trees. And so when you see like a crabapple tree, some tree or bush that has lots of fruit, look through it, check through it, see if there's a single bird. Could be a robin. Robins are one of those birds that are also frugivores in the wintertime. They eat fruit in the winter. And so they will gather at these crabapple trees and other, sumac we talked about. You can see pictures of that on our Facebook page. But anything that has fruit on it, will attract these birds that do eat the fruit. And we're familiar with robins eating worms in the summertime, but in the wintertime they switch to fruit. So you can see them gathered sometimes in huge flocks at these fruit trees. And oftentimes waxwings are mixed in with them. And sometimes waxwings can be in small flocks or large flocks. The cedar waxwings are our most common waxwing, and they have yellow at the end of the tail and grayish breast, little tuft. If I can dig up a photo. Oh, maybe I've got my book. Let me pull it out and see if I can show you the waxwing here, because they're really quite pretty birds when you have a chance to see them. 423. All right, let's see if we can show you the waxwings. They are the two different waxwings. This one is the cedar waxwing, which is our more common one, and this one is the Bohemian waxwing, which is from farther north. And you can see that the Bohemian has red underneath the tail. That's one of the easiest ways to tell it, but you can also look for the white markings on the wings. But both of them have the yellow at the end of the tail. There, see if you can see that. And oftentimes when you see them, they're up in a tree, so you're just kind of looking at their belly. So you can look for those undertail coverts. And if they're rusty red, then you've got the Bohemian waxwing from farther north. So check your fruit trees and look and see what you might be able to spot, whether it's robins or pine grosbeaks, which are showing up now and around quite a bit, cedar waxwings or Bohemian waxwings. And then sometimes you get mixed in with them the European starlings. They're black birds with white speckles on them in the wintertime, and they have kind of a long, thin, pointed bill. And they can gather in big flocks, and they also like fruit. So you could see all of those at fruit trees. And mockingbirds, occasionally, they do eat fruit in the wintertime, but you won't have them in flocks. You'll just have a single bird. And they defend their sort of feeding bushes and trees. So you'll have one mockingbird, and it might actually be chasing the other fruit-eating birds to try and protect its food source. But let me show you the starling here. I'll put that in my book, 416. All right. Let's see if we can show that to you. There we go. So there we go. That's the winter one. That's what it looks like in the wintertime. And you don't always see that brownish color on the wings. Oops, I got my finger going the wrong way. So sometimes those wings look just as dark. So those are the species to look for if you're looking for in fruit trees. So thanks for joining me. It's Becky with New Hampshire Audubon, and if you have a question, don't hesitate to post a comment. You can always send us a message on Facebook, or you can email us at birdsetc, BIRDSETC, at nhaudubon.org, and we'd be happy to try and answer your questions. You can also send along photos if you've seen something that you don't recognize and you want to get an identification of. So if anybody can see and hear me, please send a comment just so I know. That's great to have, and glad to have you with me. All right, there's one other photo I'm going to try and show you. I mentioned this bird last week, and it was a new yard bird for me. I was very excited. And I'm going to try this again here. All right, hold on for just a second. There we go. Oh, no, what happened? There. All right, let's see if you can see that bird. There we go. All right. So you notice it's got a little bit of a black mask and a grayish breast and a pretty sort of a big bill. You can't see the hook on it, but it's got a chunky bill. And then it's got a little black and white on its tail, which you can see underneath. So that's more dramatic if you see it from the top. And that is a northern shrike. And northern shrikes are birds which eat small mammals and other birds. And this shrike was in my yard, and a flock of house sparrows was all around it in my lilac bush. They were cheeping away, and it was watching to see, definitely looking for any opportunity to catch something and looking at the ground. They will go after small mammals as well as small birds. So it moved to a different place in the bush, and the house sparrows moved around it. And then it flew across my driveway, and the house sparrows all followed it. I thought that was very interesting behavior. And I was lucky enough to get that picture of it. That bird was an immature. It had that sort of brownish coloring on the breast. And the adults have a pretty clear whitish gray breast, no brown color, and a much blacker mask by the eye. They look very much like mockingbirds. In fact, it took me a long time to kind of figure out how do you tell them apart. But the mockingbirds sit very differently. The shrike, you just see it sitting upright like that, whereas the mockingbird sits more horizontally with its sort of tail up in the back and its body horizontally and the head up just a little bit. So you can sort of watch how they behave and how they sit and get an idea of which bird it might be, the shrike or the mockingbird. Uh, the northern shrikes are only here in the wintertime, and they're not very numerous. Some years we have more than others, but most of the time they're just scattered here and there. And this northern shrike that I saw in my yard was only there for, maybe a few minutes, and then it flew off, and I haven't seen it again. And that's very common for shrikes. They'll move around. But if they find a place that they are finding good food, they may stay for a while. I think I've seen them stay for maybe a month or so in an area. But sometimes they'll move around in a larger winter area. So you may see them for a little bit in one spot, and then they'll be miles away, still in the general area, but not close to where they were initially. And if you watched Phil, I think he talked about the northern shrikes. They spear their prey oftentimes on thorns of hawthorn trees. And they may feed on it then when it's impaled on the spine, or they may leave it there for caching. So they save that food so they can come back to it later in times when they can't find food as readily. They're very interesting birds, and once we get to around March, they're usually headed back north to their breeding areas. So this is the time to watch for them. So again, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to drop them in the comments, or if you've seen anything interesting, would love to hear about it. On the migration front, well, we're pretty much into winter at this point. Birds have moved through. Waterfowl is off the local ponds, which are freezing up. It's come through. It's moved to wintering areas. They're pretty much on ocean or any large bodies of water that might still have some open areas. They may stay for a while on things like common mergansers and common golden eyes. But your other ducks are pretty much farther south at this point. So our sparrows have moved through. They're down to their wintering territories too. So now we're looking at our year-round residents and some of these eruptive birds, like the pine grosbeak I just mentioned, that may come down from farther north to our area. Some of the eruptives we had big numbers of in the fall, but they've moved through. Species like the purple finch have come through, and the red-breasted nuthatches, some are still around, others have moved farther south, um, because our numbers have gone down a little bit in red-breasted nuthatches. They're still definitely around feeding on pine cones, so hopefully they'll hang in there for the whole winter. Some of the other eruptives, like pine siskins, they move around a lot. Same with evening grosbeaks. People are reporting evening grosbeaks, but they're moving around. I had a flock in my yard for a few days, and then they've moved elsewhere. Someone else has just had them arrive. So you never know what's going to happen this time of year and through the winter with these eruptive birds as they move from one place to another. Uh, so that's what we've got for migration. I think we're pretty much through migration, and we'll just be with our winter birds for a little while now. So that gives us a chance to think about what food we might want to put out. People have been asking if bears are still out. By and large, if you're in sort of the northern colder part of the state, they should be into hibernation. If you're in the very southern part of the state and we get some warm temperatures happening, they could still be active. So you'll have to gauge your local conditions when it comes to the threat of bears to bird feeders. We certainly do not want to encourage bears to go to bird feeders. So if you get a warm spell, you may want to bring your feeders in um, and not leave them out overnight. I know that works for some people, but not for others. Sometimes bears are active during the days. So you may need to resort to scattering seed on the ground during a December warm spell. All right. While we've got our feeders going, there's one thing you can always put out, bears or no, and that's water. Birds will come to water in winter that's unfrozen. And so you can get a heated water bath. There are, well, water bath isn't the right word, um, because it's a bird feeder, not bird feeder, bird bath, a heated bird bath. And it's just like a plastic bird bath, but the bottom has a heating element. So you plug it in and you leave it plugged in, and the water will stay unfrozen. You can also get a heating element, a small like heating elements that you put into the water. It's separate from the bird bath itself. And you put the element into the water, and then that keeps the water from freezing. Birds in the summertime, they need water when there's not much around because of dryness, particularly with the drought that we had. And then in the wintertime, they need water because it freezes up. So that can be a popular attractant for birds that you can put out pretty much all year round. And so I encourage you to explore that kind of feature to have. And when you do put it out, birds like to have some cover nearby, especially if they go in to take a bath. They really want to pop to a bush or a shrub nearby where they can preen and shake off the water from their feathers. So you want to site the bird bath near some cover. Oftentimes birds like to come to the ground. The bird bath I have is above the ground. So you might want to explore what height works well. Of course, when we get lots of snow, you want it to be above the snow cover. So that's why mine's on a pedestal. But when we don't have much snow, on the ground can be a good spot for it. Another thing that you can put out for birds is a brush pile. And this time of year when we get storms coming through and lots of branches are coming down, If you have a little corner of your yard where you can pile brush, um, you put the heavier, larger branches on the bottom and then the smaller branches on the top. And birds will use that for cover in the wintertime. They may roost in there and look for maybe little insects underneath in the leaf litter under the brush pile. So that's another thing you can put out any time of year. You can start it. I know I had some branches come down in the recent storm, so that's what made me think about it. I was adding to my brush pile when those branches came down. So go ahead and work on one of those. A couple of other things I thought I'd mention just to watch for in the natural world. One is the aurora tonight. They're predicting a possible good night for watching the aurora, and it may be clear. So if you have a chance to go outside and look for the aurora borealis, um, that if it's there, it can be quite spectacular. So I encourage you to do that. You do need to get away from lights. It can be quite hard to see when there are lots of lights around you. Also, if you're inside with all your lights on and you walk out, your eyes will not be adjusted yet, and sometimes you can actually miss it because your eyes need to adjust so it can pick up the fainter light of the aurora. So if you have a chance to go out and watch for that, I encourage you to do that. The other thing that I'm noticing right now when I'm outside looking around is the squirrel nests that are up in trees. They're called drays, squirrel drays. These are made by gray squirrels, and they're sort of big collections of branches and leaves. They look pretty good sized, and they're up high in the tree, usually in a crotch of a tree, or out in some of the heavier branches. And people and always wonder, is that a hawk nest or is it a squirrel nest? And one of the ways you can tell is to look and see if there are leaves. If there are leaves in it, encompassed in it, it's a squirrel drey. If it's totally all sticks in the crotch of a tree, it's likely a nest. It could be a crow nest, a raven nest, a hawk nest. But the squirrel drays have lots of leaves mixed in with them. So if you see that, then you know you've got a squirrel dray. And this is the time of year when it's really easy to see them. All the leaves are off the trees. You've got the branches silhouetted, and you can spot the drays that are in your neighborhood. So watch for them as you're out and about. And I think, let's see, I'll show you one other thing that I will try and I'll have to do a little research on because I found not a bird track, an animal track in my yard. And I think I know what it is, but I'll show it to you. And then the next time I'm on Facebook Live, I'll let you know the results of my research. There we go. Yeah. Let's see if that shows up. Oh, not very well. Let's try this. Oh boy. Oh, you can kind of see it. You see there a couple of prints and a long drag between them. I'll show you the other picture of the whole track. There, can you see that track there? I think I know what it is, but I'm going to do some research. And next time I will let you know what the track is. So when we get those little snowfalls, those fresh snowfalls, it's a great time to do some tracking because it's soft on top of something hard. In this case, it was in the tracks in my driveway, so underneath was dark and the animal had stepped in the snow, so you could see the track quite well. And when you have a little thin snow covering, that can be a great time to go looking for animal tracks and try and identify them. So when the birds are quiet, take a look at tracks out there in the snow. Um, as just to let you know that next week Phil will be joining us and doing the Facebook Live. I'll be off for that week. We will not have a Facebook Live on Christmas Eve, so I wish you all a good holiday. And then I will be back on New Year's Eve on the 31st. So I will see you then. I may be changing the time to noontime. So if you have any comments on date or time when you'd like to see the Facebook Live, please let me know. Happy to get feedback in that area. So thanks a lot for joining me today. It's Becky Suomala with New Hampshire Audubon, and as always, we appreciate your support. We're an independent nonprofit, and we depend on donations to be able to provide our programs and all the other work that we do. So thanks for joining me. Have a great holiday, and I'll see you on New Year's Eve.